Good evening. Hello. Welcome to the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen. I am so delighted that you could be here this evening. And also to let you know that we're in a very special room. We only use this room on special occasions. And the fact that we have Neil Mazzella here this evening seemed to be good enough cause to use this room. So welcome. This is our assembly room that the members use once a month. I am Karen Taylor, Program Director of the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen, and as I said, I'm so pleased to welcome you here this evening. This is the third in five Labour lectures that are part of the Labour, Literature and Landmark lecture series. This series, Labour, Literature and Landmarks, is supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council. A little background on the General Society, particularly for those of you who this is your first visit. The Society was founded in 1785 by a group of skilled craftsmen and artisans. And today, this 228-year-old organization continues the tradition to serve and improve the quality of life of the people of the city of New York. And we do this in different ways. One of the main ways being we have a wonderful tuition-free Mechanics Institute that's been here for a number of years. And if you know anyone who's interested in the trades, please tell them about that. We have a wonderful library downstairs that next time you visit, if you haven't been before, you should explore. It's a wonderful resource. And of course, we have this lecture series. This lecture series is part of a tradition that has been going for nearly 200 years. And tonight continues that tradition. This is, as I said, this is one of 5 Labour lectures that will provide a behind-the-scenes look at the creative industries in New York, focusing on the talented artists that provide the heartbeat of cinema and theatre. The series is created by Beverly Miller, who is the president of the local United Scenic Artists, USA 829, and we really want to thank Bev so much for her help and support, and for everyone involved with USA 829. And Beverly is actually going to say a few words about United Scenic Artists, and she's also going to introduce our guest speaker, Neil Mazzella. Thank you. Bev.
Thank you, Karen, and good evening. United Scenic Artists, for those of you who aren't members, and we do have several members here tonight, is a labor union that was founded in 1894 to represent the theater designers in New York City. It's grown over the past 100 years, and we represent designers in set design, costume design, lighting design, sound design, projection design. We represent scenic artists. We represent, who am I forgetting? Art department coordinators in both film and theater, in different national agreements and in local agreements. Our goal, of course, is to provide fair wages, terms and conditions for our members. And we have been very fortunate in having the ability to represent people whose craft and skills are non-paralleled across the globe. I was fortunate enough to come to the General Society when one of our members was doing a film here, and met Karen and Victoria and became very interested in the programs that they provide, and this has led to the partnership that you see happening tonight. We're fortunate to have Neil Mazzella here this evening. Neil has been an integral part in our world of USA 829 as he has provided substantial work opportunities for our members through Hudson Scenic for many decades. His little mom and pop scenic shop has grown into a world-class provider of everything you need to mount the biggest Broadway show ever, but he has never lost the touch of caring for every part of the process, thereby ensuring the highest quality of work and conditions for his workers. And I first became involved with Hudson way back when Neil and I were sitting on opposite sides of a negotiating table. But that was way back in the 80s, and although we started on different sides of the table, we've grown to work together to provide opportunities in fair agreements for our workers, for training for our workers. Neil was actually a catalyst in our training programs because he pointed out to me that we needed them. He is now on the board of our apprenticeship trust fund, and we work on that together all the time, and we provide training for our new members and for our older members in skills classes, which elevates the craft and in the theater craft that we love here in New York. So, as a union brother, Neil has been in the exceptional position of helping members to acquire skills that are necessary to carry on the tradition of quality that both Hudson Scenic and United Scenic Artists Local 829 stand for. We thank him for that and for his years of dedication to theater tradition that we all hold so dear and which makes New York and Broadway so special. So, Neil, here you go.
Beverly, thank you, and thank you to the Society, Karen, Victoria, thank you for inviting me. I'm going to just say this, if I get off point, don't be afraid to raise your hand and ask me a question, because we're going to be rambling a little bit, all with a purpose. The goal tonight is introduce you to organized labor in the arts. Now, if I become unclear, you might walk out of here and say, wow, he's really pro-union. Or you might walk out of here and say he's really anti-union. Or you might say he's all management. And if I am clear, you'll realize I'm all of those things because I've, over the years, put myself, by choice, in a very unique position. I've been a card-carrying member of the IA for 40 years. I am the owner of a scenery shop, a lighting shop, and a production management company, all named Hudson, Hudson Scenic, Hudson Sound and Light, Hudson Theatrical Associates, and we'll just refer to Hudson, and if you need to know which one we're talking about, just ask me. But I've done that on purpose because I'm very, very attached to organized labor. I was born in organized labor. I'm a member of organized labor, but by some luck of the draw, I am an owner, a manager. In fact, I brought a couple of contracts with me just to let you know how I live. This one is the Nederlander contract with Local 1. My name is actually in it. And when it comes to certain decisions, by mutual agreement between labor and management, I am the person that goes and makes decisions on certain types of disputes. Depending on who I go with, I am considered pro-labor, naturally, if I go with Local 1, and if I go with Nederlander organization, I'm pro-management. Over the years, I could tell you it's been 50-50, so you could ask anybody on the street and you'll find out one story or another, depending. If you ask Sally, I would be pro-labor because she's a manager. If you ask Jane or Beverly, I might be pro-labor, but that would depend on the day. But that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about labor, and labor on Broadway specifically, because Hudson is a very Broadway-centric organization. We also do television. Bev, you forgot to mention that. That's another area of 829, Local 1, that has jurisdiction. We are not so much movies because that's a different local 52. And we're going to talk about the differences because we're going to talk about the future of organized labor, the future of theater, and to know that we're going to go back in our history a little bit to find out how we got there, where we're going. We're now in the 21st century, and we're working in theaters that were built 2 centuries ago, 1 century ago, with specific seating, with specific physical limitations, let's call it. Tom Stein will be here in 2 weeks. He's here tonight. He handles all the Schubert theaters. He'll talk to you in 2 weeks about just what those limitations are and just exactly how he keeps them up to code and all those things. But we, as a scenery company, as a lighting company, as a management company, are given these theaters by our managers. They rent them, and then we're given extraordinary challenges to go in and put a show like Matilda in the Schubert, okay? Or maybe Mamma Mia for the first 12 years in the Winter Garden, and now it's at the Broadhurst. And that's what we do for a living. We take those challenges and fashion some kind of physical production with a designer, because we build them, we don't design them, figure it out, make it work. I just want to acknowledge Roger Bardwell, our foreman at the shop, who is part of many of those things, and how we get them in these buildings. And then, if it's a hit, we have to figure out how it tours. How does it go out? How does it go to Schenectady, where we'll be opening Newsy's tour, and then go to Chicago? And I could tell you, if you've been to the theaters in Schenectady, they have their own unique challenges. If you go to Seattle, the Fifth Avenue, you're loading in up a hill. If you go to the Lyceum, right down the street, the stage door is on 46th Street. The stage door is the loading door. So every theater has a challenge, and that is what we do for a living. Where labor comes in is that labor is what we use to do it. And labor has its own unique challenges, and we're not always cooperating. So what do I mean by that? I said I've been an IA member for 40 years. The first union card I got was called an ACT card. They're still very active cards. And when I use the language of the theater, if you don't know it, just tell me, I'll be happy to explain it. ACT is Associated Crafts and Technicians. It was introduced by the IA. The IA is the parent organization of 829, Local 1, Local 52, all of them. It was introduced back in '73 to corral the labor pool that was handling rock and roll tours. They gave us these cards. And as long as we were on a rock and roll tour, we were fine. Okay, we were with Alice Cooper. We were called the Dirty 100 because we were the first 100 guys to get these cards. I can tell you right now, the brotherhood that we joined didn't like us. You couldn't go anywhere with that card other than if you were on the road with a rock and roll tour. Now, that's not really in keeping with the bylaws of any union, but every local is territorial. And the history of that goes throughout all the unions. We know today that labor is not the most popular thing. We might have brought that on ourselves, but we were talking, Andy and I were talking before about this society and the history, and we were talking about the tycoons of the 19th century and just how Andrew Carnegie, right, built this, really did all this? Was very generous. My wife and I went up to Newport this week. We saw the Vanderbilt mansions. We saw all that. And then as a student of organized labor, you know that the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s was a tumultuous time in American labor. They were just getting organized. You'll see that Beverly's Union, Local 1, they're all somehow organized in the 1880s, 1890s into the 20th century. And what they were really doing, what they were addressing, is workers' rights. And we use the word workers. And if you look at your oldest unions, United Mine Workers, United Auto Workers, Ladies Garment Workers, the word workers is in there. And it was respected. And that's what you were doing. You were working. And your organized group was called the workers. Kind of lost that in the 50s when the Cold War happened. Now Workers Unite became socialistic, became communistic. You couldn't be a worker anymore. And apparently the AFL-CIO was founded right here, or the AFL was founded here. Is that true too? Is that right, Andy? Right down, yeah, somewhere they met here. But we went from being workers to labor, okay? And with that, labor took on a different connotation. Now, what do we think about labor? Well, I was born into a ILA family, International Longshoremen. Everybody worked the docks. We grew up working the docks. Your goal in life was to get a dock book. I mean, that was it. Now, this was the 50s, and then lo and behold, in the mid-50s, we get on the waterfront, so that kind of appeal kind of disappeared. And that became where we were now organized labor, but it was never really any kind of connotation about labor, good or bad, is always kind of imposed. You know, there's that movie, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, The End Line, When the legend becomes fact, print the legend. So it's more fun to print on the waterfront. It's a great movie, but what is good about labor is kind of lost in the 21st century, and that's what we are trying to bring back. One of the things we talked about, and one thing about the society, is the training. People aren't born into labor movements anymore, into longshoreman families. Yes, we're born into stagehand families. Yes, we're born into other types of things, but everybody tells their kids that they should go to college and not have to work for a living. By that, they mean lifting bales, all the things that work connotated back when Teamsters became Teamsters and stagehands were unloading trucks, and they were railroad trucks in those days. But there isn't anything really wrong with that. And what's really happened, and now we're talking about the 21st century, is the technology. And the technology in theater has changed tremendously. So when we were organized back in 1973 as rock and roll roadies, we were using electronic lighting gear. Broadway was still using what was called piano boards. Broadway skipped the whole electronic age and went right to the computer age with the introduction of Chorus Line. That was the first computerized lighting board, was Chorus Line. They had skipped all the technology we were using with the rock and roll tours. If you talk about a rock and roll tour, the first tour of KISS was a 24-foot truck with a forklift, and that's how we did all the gimmicks. KISS became 24 tractor-trailers worth of sound gear, lighting gear, and special effects over the years, and they were always on the cutting edge of technology. One of the things that were controversial on Broadway was we introduced moving lights. Well, moving lights were introduced in the Genesis tour many, many years before, and we used that technology on Broadway. On the road, on the rock and roll tours. So why did they need us? Why did they need all these kids that looked like this, a lot younger then? Because we were knowing what the new technology was. So Broadway, when it started using the technology, didn't have the skill set to do that. There's a famous, famous story about how Local 1 missed the boat on television. When television was invented or was going to become something, the comment was, it'll never catch on. And another whole union grew out of that called NABIT, which existed for many, many years until it was finally absorbed into Local 1. But sometimes a union misses that technology. So this time, they bring in all these kids who know how to use this stuff. The stuff is going to finally get to Broadway, but they still don't want us on Broadway. They want the technology, but they don't want us. So that's why I said that we're not always nice to our own brothers in the area of labor. Over time, naturally, moving lights became the norm as opposed to the exception. Over time, everything's computerized, whether it's the lights, the soundboards are computerized, the scenery is automated now by computers, everything's run by computers. So there's a skill set that the industry, particularly the theater industry, has needed. That's one of the things we do at Hudson is we try to train that skill set because there's so much of that high technology, and now with LEDs, that's introduced. So now we need people that know how to program LEDs. So we work with the union, whether it's Local 1 or something else, on the training to make that happen. We use our facility, we use our inventory, we use whatever we can, we use our vendor relationships to make that training happen. And now what we're seeing is that there are people coming to Hudson, coming to the industry with graduate degrees that are willing to work under a union contract, a collective bargaining agreement, and that they're willing to grow there because there are growth opportunities in the industry. It's not just a pay raise. There's places to go. I mean, we have a lot of people all over Midtown New York that I refer to as the Hudson graduates. You get a training there, and you then can go further, you can go somewhere else, or you can stay. The company's 34 years old. We have many people there that have been there for more than 20 years. That's a testimony of the strength of Hudson and the interest of Hudson. They are organized. They're members of Local 1. They're members of 829, but they've stayed at Hudson because Hudson provides some stability in what is a very, very unstable industry. The industry itself doesn't invest in itself. So what do I mean by that? A general manager will get hired to do a Broadway show, and that is a show, and that show has a shelf life, unless you're Phantom of the Opera when you go for 30 years. But most shows have a shelf life, and they close. And the only focus is that show and the economics of that show while that show is running. We do a lot of shows now that are an exact answer to the economics on Broadway. You'll see it everywhere. Limited run, 12 to 14 weeks, movie star, done. Very small cast, very small crew, the job opportunities are limited, the turnover is tremendous. They're always hoping to cash out because that's the formula for the plays right now. Am I overstating that, Sally? But that is what the industry is about right now. So there are certain plays, okay, we did 2 Shakespeare plays, large cast, in repertory. That adds to the cost. But it walked in as a hit. It was a hit in London, starred Mark Rylance. It paid back, but it was still a limited run. But it had a larger cast than 4 people. But you could see something, and I'll give you examples of that. Realistic Joneses at the Lyceum, cast of 4, crew of 4. Mothers and Sons, the Golden, cast of 4, crew of 4. The exception, of course, is All the Way, which is up at the Neil Simon, but the Neil Simon has like 1,400 seats. The other theaters all have 1,000. Limited economics. What other shows do we have that's 4 people? I'm trying to think. We have a couple of them. They're all going to close. What? Glass Menagerie was one of ours, yes. 4 people, limited run, crew of 4. That was at the Booth Theater. So that is what that's how the economics are adjusting itself in the 21st century. So with that, the industry, let me say, is not investing in the training for us to go forward. So it has to be a vendor, okay? Or it has to be a union. And you'll see that all the unions are investing in training for their members. Companies with some longevity that want to go forward are investing in their training, like Hudson. We're not the only company. There are other companies that are all investing in that. There are organizations. We're also historically a very unregulated business. The only people we used to, and still do, answer to are the fire department. We have to make sure that everything is flame-proofed. Well, now if we're flying somebody, like we do in Aladdin, like we do in, Wicked has a lot of flying, we do in Cinderella, Department of Labor is now coming in before we can fly someone. They have to review the whole flying requirement. So now we have to be in tune with that regulation as well. The building department, if we go beyond 7 feet from the fire curtain out into the house, we have to file all that. So there are many shows that we've done that with, and we have to then do architectural drawings, get them done, go through an expediter, and file it with the building department. We have to do that in conjunction with the theater owner. So we're getting more sophisticated, and there are more groups that are actually coming to monitor what we're doing. So we're not as free form as we used to be. But we all have to do that within the structure of organized labor. So we're doing our job, and we are complying with the city agencies that we have to, and then at the end of the day, we have to put a show on. Because if somebody, somewhere, someday, somebody said it, the show must go on. I don't know who that person is. I'm sure he lived in Florida, and I'm sure he was calling up when we were in the middle of a snowstorm. But that's what we do. Historically, the theater entertainment labor organizations, which I'm telling you is very territorial, is no different than any other organized labor group. Very flattering picture of me out in front of the Times Square Ball. Now, the first ball we built was in '99. How many have we built now? 3. I thought it was 4, but we built 3. Roger engineered all of them. The first 2 were 6 foot in diameter. We dropped the first one, New Year's Eve going into 2000. Then we built another one. I don't know why. And then they said they wanted the ball out 12 months a year, which it is now, and that's a 12-foot ball. When we got that job, and it was just when we were moving from the Bronx up to Yonkers, my picture was in the paper in front of the old ball, which was all light bulbs. And next thing we know, we have trade council problems because it's not Local 1's jurisdiction. Local 3, electrical workers said it was their jurisdiction, and the ornamental iron workers came and said it was their jurisdiction. So they needed to build the ball. But we had the contract. So I called, and you can't go to the Trades Council. You're supposed to be able to go to the Trades Council, but I'm going to tell you right now, if you're in a theatrical union, you are so low on the food chain that it doesn't matter. So we called a meeting with the ironworkers and Local 3 and Local 1, and we met at the shop. And they told us why it was their jurisdiction, and Local 1 told them why they couldn't permit it because we were a signatory to Local 1. And at the end of the day, we made a deal. So the first question the business agent of Local 1 said to the business agent of the ornamental ironworkers, well, how many men are you going to send here? And his answer was, well, none. We're not sending anybody here. We just need you to write a letter acknowledging that we share jurisdiction over this so I can bring it to Washington, D.C. Okay. That was simple, but never told us that. They just needed to be publicly acknowledged. Local 3, how many guys are you sending? Oh, we're going to send 4, 6 maybe. Well, they'll all be here. Within 1 week, nobody ever showed up again. Okay? Now, I didn't really care because, you know, this was all being handled, but we went through an enormous negotiation, as we say in Shakespeare, the sound and fury signifying nothing, but we've lived with that for every new ball we've ever sent there. And, you know, now that it's on top of the Old Times building, it's the jurisdiction of Local 3, and we go once a year to make sure it still works, and it's usually around New Year's Eve, naturally. But that is kind of the same thing we have even in our own IA umbrella. We don't do film, because that's a different local. Well, we're doing a film right now in Brooklyn at the Armory, which is actually a Broadway film. It's going to be the new Times Square Theater on 42nd Street. It's called Broadway 4D. And it's 17 of the most famous Broadway songs you'll ever hear, sung by stars like Hugh Jackman, Christina Aguilera, everybody. And they're building Broadway sets in an armory as opposed to renting a theater. And they need our expertise because they're doing theater. Now, we're not building the scenery, but we are rigging it to be like a theater so that they can actually operate it during these shows. And we had to go and we had to meet with Local 52 and we had to negotiate what we're going to do, what they're going to do. And where we got the upper hand was because we're adding a lot of automation. And they don't do automation in films because they could cut, edit, and do all of that. So we're doing the automation. What I didn't realize, and I learned this, was that automation is part of special effects. So as the special effects grip told me, if you want to blow up this set, I'll do it, I don't need you. But if you want to automate it, I need your guys. So we have 4 guys there right now in Brooklyn automating scenery for a film. Noah, anybody see the movie Noah? The Ark, that's ours. Why? Thank you, the Ark, not the movie, but the Ark. Okay, thank you. See how that, Roger? The Ark was great because it was heavy-duty steel, and it needed to be certified, needed to be inspected, and we have the expertise to do that. So we were asked to do this very heavy-duty Ark, which went to the same armory we're at now, and that's how we get involved in the movies. But other than that, we can't build scenery for them. We can't do those things. It's a totally different local, and that happens throughout. In the old days, when we first started going into theaters and bringing scenery, and 829 would come in and paint it, you know, touch-up call, we used to just work together. Now, one of the challenges for me as a technical director is when everybody's in the theater at the same time. So I've got Local 1, they're on an 8-hour call, 8-hour minimum. I've got Local 829, they're on a 7-hour minimum. I've got the Musicians Union, they're on 3-hour calls. I got wardrobe, I got hair, and then I've got the cast, equity, who's on a whole nother set of rules. So planning lunch is really a challenge. So we, Local 1, everybody used to just let 829 would have to leave because the cast would come on at 1 o'clock. So we'd go to lunch at 12 and we'd let the scenic artist paint till 1. Just keep going, we don't care. Those days are gone as well. So now when the Scenics come from Hudson, the first thing I said is we're on their time, so when they take a coffee break, we take a coffee break. They go to lunch, we go to lunch. No overlap. Just that kind of dynamic is missing. I'm being sentimental, but yeah, it used to be a lot more, but now with these books, there's no variance. You have to stick with the books. So this one is Nederlander is, which one is which? This is the League, they're purple, and Nederlander is blue. Nederlander has their own contract, different from this, lots of similarities, but depending on what theater you go in, you better have the right book because anything could trip you up. Now, let me tell you something about a contract. This is where Beverly and I got in trouble 100 years ago. They invited a non-signator to the negotiation. We spent a year of our lives with that non-signature trying to redefine, actually page 2. If you look at a contract, any contract, like the first thing you read is scope and jurisdiction. Yes?
You said raise your hand when you don't know.
Go ahead, yes.
I think I know what it means, but what is a non-signature?
This was a vendor, a shop, that did not have a contract with the union. So they were organizing this vendor at our expense. We were all signatories, but now we got to watch this new guy show up and want to change the scope and jurisdiction of the contract. And we wasted a year watching him negotiate, and we couldn't get down to like, what's the money? 1 year of negotiation, yes. At the end of that year, that vendor left the negotiation. But both sides of the table were so angry by then, it ended in a strike. Yes, Beverly walked out on me. Yeah. What? Well, no, that company was trying to have organized scenic artists. To this day, they still don't have organized scenic artists. They still is a yeah, the collective bargaining agreement is what runs it. If you sign it, you're a signator. But there are other shops that do what we do that do not have agreements with, for example, 829. And there are no other shops that have an agreement with Local 1 because they live in different jurisdictions. So there's one in Newburgh, they have as a local up there. There's 2 in Connecticut, they have different contracts up in Connecticut. There's some in Jersey, there's 3 in Canada. So the competition for a company like Hudson is pretty extreme. And so far, so good. So don't worry about us, we're okay. We're okay. We've seen it come and go. But there's nobody opening a shop in the New York jurisdiction. Local 1's jurisdiction is Staten Island, Manhattan, and the Bronx. Local 4 is Brooklyn and Queens, and there are a couple of shops there as well. So you'd have to know like where you're going to work, and then you'd be working under that CBA, collective bargaining agreement, under whatever that contract says with whatever that local is. So when we get busy, and busy I mean 140 employees, we don't always get enough employees from Local 1. So what I've done historically is I've called the Brotherhood of Carpenters, Ornamental Iron Workers, and the, what are they? The iron workers. We called it iron workers as well, because at that time they had 25% unemployment. Local 1 had a full employment. So getting talented people from other unions was one way to go. And it worked out. We had enough people to finish the work. But that is, what you're working when you're working within the organized labor movement, because that's what we have to do. We didn't sign contracts with any of those unions because we're not allowed to, because we have a CBA with Local 1. We have a CBA with 829. We have a CBA with the Teamsters. So we have to honor that and first and foremost go through those unions. If we're bringing in other people from other unions, they then have to work under these agreements. So their dues will go to Local 1, we'll pay into their benefits, et cetera, but it'll all go to Local 1, 829, or the Teamsters. It's just the way it is. It's not foreign. It's not anything different. It's like that in any union. You work in their jurisdiction. But you can't walk into just to finish what I was saying, you can't walk into your first day of negotiation and want to change page 2. That's not going to happen. I mean, I've learned a lot about negotiating, but I don't start on page 2. I mean, there's over 150 pages here. Pick another page. Pick something. You know, how about wages? That's what I always do. I want to go for the wages. I'm not afraid to pay the wages, but that's what I want to negotiate. And in 829, that's what we negotiate. With Local 1, my big thing there is, let's negotiate all the money I pay you to not go to work. That's and I say that in front of local members here. They all know. I mean, I've been in negotiations for so long that I'm not bringing any new tricks to the table. So, and it's not like they're bringing anything new either. Sorry, Beth. You know, you get old at it, but I enjoy it, and that's why I said when I started out, organized labor is a big part of my life. Why? Because the companies I run are all part of it. Whether I go downtown to manage a show or whether I'm managing my own company, I have to take into consideration the CBAs, honor them. And that's the one thing I always hear about when it's a negative comment about labor. You don't have a contract with one person's name on it. It's got the unions and it's got the management on it. So at one point, you both agreed to it. And if you study the history of these agreements, you understand why they are where they're at. There's always been something that tips the balance of why labor makes a gain or why management makes a gain, but you may not know what year that was. You may not understand that. I'll give you an example. Many, many years ago, one of the negotiating points I asked for was we used to give, on Wednesdays was payday, so you'd get 45 minutes. You'd get extra time for lunch, okay? So that time came out of what was our productivity time. Well, that was when everybody's check was going to bounce. Well, now they don't bounce because there's laws and all of that, and now there's direct deposit. So I said, can we just eliminate this so we could all go back to work? Now, up there in Yonkers, we take a half-hour lunch, even though in the contract it says it's an hour, because nobody wants to hang around. They just want to eat and go back to work, so we do that. It's not in the contract, but we've never done anything less. We've never had a 1-hour lunch. When we go downtown, it's always a 1-hour lunch. So I have to make sure the scenics or my Local 1 members know you have to take an hour. Sorry, you have to hang around. Okay, so it's different. But when you operate in one building with single ownership, it's pretty easy to accommodate, as long as everybody agrees. And I've tried. One of the things I've always tried to do is get an 8-hour day out of 829. That will never happen in my lifetime. Never happen. There's other clauses which I will not share because I'm still holding hope, because I've probably got 2 or 3 more negotiations in me before I go gently into that good night. But there are things that you just don't walk into the room with because you've walked in so many times, and if you want to spend the rest of your life there, you bring it back again. We had this negotiation. We just finished a negotiation. And we were in a room, and we were in a sidebar, and in came the business agent, the president. I don't know if you were there. You were there, Jane. You were there. And it was one of my colleagues who owned another shop, and he just wasn't going to give up on this. And I said, if you don't drop this, the way you have to change the language, we will never get out of this room. Because he had it formatted that it could never get past either the committee, the rank and file, nothing. But it was just an educated way of readdressing it, which he agreed to, the union agreed to, and then we finally got out of the room. But if you say the wrong thing or you make the wrong proposal, you will never get out of that room. And be honest, getting out of that room is a priority from the minute I get in, because you're sitting there and you have to listen to both sides. We did 1 year, I agreed to negotiate with all of the shop owners. That was a big mistake for me personally. For 4 weeks, I heard one of the vendors negotiate all of his private points in his own contract that he had negotiated on his own, and he wanted to renegotiate, but now he's with the larger committee. For 4 weeks, we listened to this guy trying to get things that were not in my contract, that had nothing to do with anybody else there. But we all sat there, and then nobody said anything except this one shop owner. And finally, they got finished with it after 4 weeks. And I said to the other side of the table, can we now talk about something important, like money? because we had never discussed money. We had never discussed raises. We had never discussed holidays. I mean, we were discussing work rules that didn't exist in anybody's contract except his. So now we say, well, you know, he's got a unique contract, so let him go by himself and negotiate it. So you learn that over time. You learn what you need to talk about, and you respect the other side, management, labor, no matter who you're representing. And you go in there and you try to let everybody know what's important in a negotiation, because there are things that are going to come up from the other side that are critically important. And if you're not respectful to it and you don't acknowledge it and you don't try to compromise it, you're not going to get heard about what's critically important to your side of the table. So you have that kind of dialogue, and you finally let each other know what you have to have. And that's really where these came from. And over the years, these have been negotiated by deciding what's really important. Modern day, we've kind of lost track of that because now there's a lot of, at least in these contracts, they start out a little hostile. I lost a very large bet several years ago because I never believed that Local 1 would strike Broadway. Well, we all know they struck it for 3 weeks. That never happened before, but that is where we're at now. And this negotiation, where these contracts just came from, were very civilized because no one wanted that again. What happens next? Well, we're all watching the Metropolitan Opera House. You've been reading that. Every indication I get is that there will be a massive lockout or a massive strike. Pick a union. Right now, they're with the chorus, next to the musicians, next to the stagehands. Every union contract expires within the same 3-month period. Who thought of that idea? I have no idea. But why would they do that to themselves? Every contract at the Metropolitan Opera House is going to expire this summer. And they're starting to negotiate right now. And as you've read in the papers, it's not going well. So we'll see what happens. I worked at the Met in 1978 to 1980, and I was part of a strike when the musicians walked out then. It's not pretty. You end up being out of work, you have to find a job, and a place like the Met, which is one of the largest employers in the arts, to go out and close has a tremendous impact on the livelihoods of everybody up there. There are hundreds of stagehands up there. They work 24 hours a day. There's 3 different crew calls. That's a lot of people. So they'll all be out of work, as well as all the wardrobe people, everybody. So we're monitoring that, we're watching that and see how that goes. But so far, not so well. Did I skip any words, or did you want to stop? Yeah, go right ahead.
So I wanted to ask you sort of 2 questions that are more on the psychological level.
Okay.
One you're sort of addressing now, which is how do you maintain good working relationships with people you've sat down with and had a contentious negotiation with for a long period of time? So how do you move on from that and go forward? And then my other question was a little bit about what do you think it is in your personality, or it sounds like you've both become an expert negotiator and also developed an affinity with all of this technology, because when you came into the business it was a completely different thing. What do you think it is about yourself?
I was an English major.
How do you adapt what is it about you think?
Well, let's talk about the first question, the relationships. You have to live with all these people. You have to also, I have to recognize that when I go into a negotiation, as close as Beverly and I are now, and as distant as we were once then, what I have to know, whether it's Beverly or Cecilia or Claffey or any of the other people, they are there to represent the people that elected them, okay? I know that. So when they walk in a room, and I'll have Local 1 this Friday because we have another dispute that we need to discuss, they are walking in representing the people that elected them. So the people that elected them, they have to protect their interests. They're not coming in and they're not going to give me an altruistic answer. So I know that. My job is to protect Hudson Scenic's interests. That's my job. I have to respect that job. I have to do it. Our mutual respect for each other, labor and management, helps us navigate those waters. Nobody wants to come in and damage an employer. Nobody wants to come in and damage a labor leader that you rely on. I don't want to do damage to any of the elected officials by being heavy-handed in some way, because that's not going to help me, because then the rank and file is going to back up the elected official and I'll be out. I'll be dealing with labor issues every day of my life. So you need to understand that they're not coming in as an adversary, they're coming in as an advocate for the very people that you have to live with. So that's why we can stay mutually respectful and actually become friends and go to dinner and things like that. The second thing is a lot more fun. You know, why am I like I am? Is that what you're really asking? Yeah. I don't know. I thought about it before I came here. I told you I grew up in an all-union organization. Now, I don't know anybody here from a longshoreman's family. I'll tell you a couple of longshoreman stories on where I saw organized labor and how I did it. There's a term called dock gang. Even that is a negative, because gangs are gangs, right? Well, anyway, my great-grandfather was a dock boss, which meant he had a dock gang, which consisted of all his sons, which were like 7. Now, the way you got a job in those days was you showed up at the docks, and if you weren't, the dock bosses would physically fight. And if you won the fight, your gang had a job that day. This is a true story, I'm telling you. I never met my great-grandfather, but when I saw his leather jacket down in the basement, it was the largest jacket I'd ever seen in my life. Now, a person like me, I'm not that big, so I can't really count on that kind of thing. But there's a great book, if you're interested in the history of the piers, called Dark Harbors. And what it is that it's about the ILA and about the battle of representing the rank and file properly as opposed to what might be considered the elected officials. Elected officials in those days on the docks were not what we would consider an elected official today, okay? I could tell you that right now. In that book, they quote a labor lawyer who represented the rank and file to the union. His name was Jim Longy, famous labor lawyer, who much later in his life I actually had the honor of meeting. And we talked about the docks and the piers, and he said, "Tell me your family's name," and I did. It was my father's side of the family, but it wasn't Mazzella. And he looks at me and says, "I hated your family." And I said, "I don't understand that." I said, "You know, they're a great family." He said, "But they didn't want to become part of the ILA as the ILA should have been." So I'm thinking, what was my great-grandfather, Johnny Friendly? I have no idea, you know, but it was a unique introduction to a family that I knew. I knew all my uncles, but I never knew my great-grandfather, and I got to grow up knowing what the docks were like. I mean, I saw your collection out there, Victoria, of ancients. I could have brought my grandfather's hook, and you could have added that, because nobody on the docks is using hooks anymore. You're not going to grab a container with a hook, okay? So, but I got I got interested. I became passionate about it. I became an advocate about organized labor, because this was part of my background. The funniest story of that, which to this day I can't even imagine, Uncle Mikey on my mother's side ran the Brooklyn Navy Yard. True story, ran the Brooklyn Navy Yard. At that time, he might as well have been commandant of the lost colony. Nobody knew where it was, nobody went there. If they got 1 or 2 ships, whenever, they had work. And then as things, and this is what we're talking about, things change. World War II happened. And guess who showed up? The Navy. It was their property. It was their, now there's a war. So the Navy showed up. And Uncle Mikey stayed there for a while and quit, because he wasn't going to take orders from a young ensign who didn't know anything, right? So as my grandmother tells the story, he came home. And that nobody ever accused Uncle Mikey of being a nice guy either, by the way. He was one of those guys. And a big black car pulled up in front of the house. Now, they were in there, they all had uniforms, they all went in the house. They came out with Uncle Mikey about an hour later, who, of course, we never saw again because he had to go to the Navy Yard. So maybe my negotiating ability came from Uncle Mikey. Guess what he negotiated? A bicycle. They gave him a bicycle so he could ride up and down the Navy Yard. I'm thinking to myself, that's the best he could do. They needed him back. The war's on. Nobody knew how to run the Navy Yard except him, so he got a bicycle. I don't know. I wanted to be better negotiator than that. So maybe that's why I'm, you know. something, I saw a bad negotiation in my family. So I thought maybe I need to do better. But this is really what happened to me about becoming whatever I am, whether it's an entrepreneur or a theater owner, or not a theater owner, but a shop owner, a vendor. I worked for other scenery companies. I worked for other shops. And we all got laid off. And we got laid off because the owner was going on vacation. And this happened every year. So you knew you were going to get laid off. Why? Because he didn't want any jobs. He didn't want anything going on. He didn't delegate. He needed to be there. And I said, holy mackerel, we're all out of work because this guy's going on vacation. And I thought that was so whimsical of him because you need an infrastructure. You need to provide work. I mean, it's hard enough. One of the things Hudson does is provide work 12 months a year for lots of people in an industry that doesn't have work 12 months a year. And then I said, okay, if I'm going to be out of work, it needs to be my fault. So if we don't have work at my shop, it's because I didn't get us work. So I've taken that burden on, and luckily we've had work for 34 years. But that is really what turned me, by watching someone just willingly lay us all off to go on vacation. That wasn't good enough for me. So I wanted to be in charge of my own destiny with that same dedication that I wouldn't be laying everybody off because I went on vacation. I don't want to lay anybody off if I get sick. I don't want to lay off anybody anytime. But the nature of the business, as many of the employees who are sitting here right now can tell you, we do go through seasonal stuff. I mean, we're very slow right now. Why? Because all our Broadway shows are over. They're all in. The last one's opening tonight. But next Tuesday will be the Tony nominations. And all the shows that we might have built that get Tony nominations will be calling us up on Wednesday for scenery for the Tony Awards. So that will get us back busy again. And then by July, we'll know what the shows are closed. We'll know what theaters are available. Someone will call up and want to fill that theater. And then the cycle continues. So we know that. But right now, we're fortunate. We have other type of work. We do other things besides theater. We're doing something for Shanghai. We're doing something for Tokyo. We're doing something for Orlando. We're building 2 ESPN studios right now. One of them's for the NFL, so we have a deadline, so we have to be done by football season. So we are lucky to get other types of work besides theater. And we're doing that film, 4D. We're doing the rigging for that, as I just mentioned. Yes? In my altruistic moment, Hudson does a lot of it. But that's when I'm feeling altruistic. When my friends call and say, oh, we're doing it at Theater for a New Audience in Brooklyn. We're about to do our 3rd show for them. Don't ask me. But that's what we're doing. We got involved with that because Julie Taymor called me up. Now, Julie Taymor did Lion King. Lion King has been an enormous benefit to Hudson. We've done I don't know how many. We just sent one to Australia. So if Julie calls and needs a favor, you have to answer. But we've done many dance companies over the years. But there is a group of non-union shops that service that, small companies, some of them larger now, and they're really where they go. A place like the Public Theater builds their own. So they'll build the park in the park. Roundabout and MTC, Manhattan Theater Club, they will go to bid with union shops for their Broadway theaters, non-union shops for their off-Broadway theaters. But there is a network of non-union shops that have always existed and have always serviced that community. Anything else? Another question before I keep going on? I'm not over yet, right? Am I done? I'm sorry. I don't want to bore you. I just looked at the clock. I was going for nonstop for an hour. Okay, so now we get back to theater and we get back to the IA and we get back to what we're doing. We know there's many locals. We know there's no synergy between any of them. We know that everybody's very territorial. So in the history of Hudson, and this is another important lesson in organized labor, we moved from the Bronx to Yonkers. So we're not in Local 1's jurisdiction anymore. But we have spent 18 years in Local 1's jurisdiction, and all the employees have Local 1 cards. So the Westchester local showed up and said, when are we going to negotiate? I said, well, really, I don't really know much about that. I said, got to talk to the crew. Now, we knew what we were doing. So the president of the IA, there became a dispute between Local 1 and the local in Westchester as who was going to represent Hudson Scenic. So the president said, well, to be honest, we represent the crew. We represent the labor pool. What does the labor pool want? And the crew, to a man, voted Local 1 because all their benefits were tied in with Local 1. And don't forget, benefits are critical to anything that any employee wants. And with that, there was a merger between Local 1 and Westchester, and now Local 1 is in charge of all of Westchester, in addition to the 3 boroughs that I mentioned before. Hudson Scenic was instrumental in that because the 40 employees with Local 1 cards at Hudson Scenic wanted continued representation from Local 1. But the union had to listen to that. They had to listen to the labor pool. That's what an elected official is supposed to do. Remember that, and it makes negotiation a lot easier because that's why they're there, to represent the employee. Now, with that, then of course Local 1 got on a tear and wanted to start organizing every other borough and every other area, but it stopped there. But the IA has done a lot of mergers to eliminate lots of smaller locals, so there's more centralized. So like Southern Connecticut, which was 3 locals, New Haven, Bridgeport, and Stamford, is now 1 large local. Why? Because there's not enough jobs in all 3 of those cities. When New Haven was New Haven as a tryout city, there were plenty of jobs. When the American Shakespeare Festival was open in Stratford, there were plenty of jobs. Those places don't really provide that many jobs anymore. So pool the resources, get a labor pool together so that if you're at the Stratford Palace, or if you're at the Klein in Bridgeport, or if you're in the Schubert in New Haven, you at least got enough guys to man it. Because the obligation to management from labor is to supply an educated, trained labor pool. And that's what they have to do. And that's where they struggle sometimes. That's where companies like Hudson help the unions to get that trained labor pool. We've been feeding downtown and midtown and the Met for years. I finally had to call up the Met and threaten them with bringing them to the committee at Local 1 for stealing guys. We would invest money training them. And then as soon as they had their training, the Met, which pays more than us, took them. And I just couldn't let that happen anymore, so, yeah.
How do you feel about the new incentivizing of Broadway tours to upstate New York and, tours now, or shows, shows opening in like Schenectady and Rochester?
Well, we're going to see it happen, Bev. It's not going to affect us.
I think it's a brilliant move, actually, for the New York State incentive program.
We're going to send Newsies to Schenectady, right? The worst theater in the world. But, so we're going to always,
Labor pool coming to service that.
well, there is a union up in Albany, Schenectady area. I mean, there is a strong union up there. They do have their arenas, and they do have that, and we've been there. They're trained. I mean, candidly, historically, if you were going out of town, the best stagehands, the most trained stagehands were always in San Francisco. They had plenty of theater, they had plenty of opera, and every movie in the world was being made there. Now, when you go to San Francisco, they're lucky to have 1 theater open, very little work at the opera, no more movies, no more scenery shops, no more lighting shops. They all used to exist out there. It's kind of, the ebb and flow of where the tax dollars go. All those movies they made in North Carolina, all non-union, because there's no unions in North Carolina. That was hot for a while. We opened up Broadway tryouts at Duke University, University of Virginia. Why? No unions. We'd build scenery and send them down there. And they would try out there and then come to Broadway. So there's always something. You got to have some kind of hook. So New York just invented a hook. Now, when Hudson Scenic started, we had to charge 8.25% tax. Lots of people wanted us to bid it with tax included. Now, you want a $500,000 show, I'm not including 8.25% tax, but they could go to a Connecticut shop and get it for the same price because they did not have to charge 8.25% tax. They should have had to pay a use tax once the show was running in New York, but nobody ever followed up on the use tax. So it should have been a level playing field, but I lost many, many shows due to tax. I joined a committee, which was an action committee, to change the law because the film industry had it already. They already had the tax incentive. The theater industry, led by the Schuberts, went to Mayor Koch at that time and said, we want that tax incentive. Mayor Koch's response was, why should we give it to you? What are you going to do, close down and move to Jersey? You know, the Broadway industry wasn't moving. We finally got it at the end of the 80s, but it also included the use tax. So it helped us a lot, but not as much as I wanted. I wanted outside vendors to have to pay something that we didn't have to pay. But everybody became on an equal playing field, so that was something. But it was very disappointing when I went up to the governor's office. They was so happy that we got this, and I said, wait, here's the law. It says the use tax is still in here for us. We wanted something more, but we took it, and it has helped us from a competitive edge. And now this new tax incentive upstate will keep our first trucks closer than sending them to Minneapolis. Toronto is a big out-of-town tryout. It's a different country. It changes the economics for us to support a show like we did with Aladdin, which opened in Toronto, to send people up and down to support it. It's a lot to do. Schenectady, we'll put them on the train. I'm just telling you that right now.
Are there training programs now within the IA for stagehands? I've been involved in.
Many of them. So we have training programs for automation. Most of the scenery companies that provide automation have training programs for their own automation. We sponsor one for ours. The very light training programs are held at our company. That's for any local one member, they go to one of these shops. Rose Brand, the soft goods, has a rigging training program that they do. So yes, there are many, many training programs to do this, particularly with the technology needs right now. They have a very active, local one has a very active committee, and we participate in many of those things. Chain hoists, simple thing is chain hoists. There's a training program on that. In our company, you can't use a forklift unless you're trained on it and certified. We have all those safety precautions. Health and safety is big. Not because I woke up one morning and said, oh, I got to really address safety, but because we had a horrible accident at the shop. And we had OSHA at the shop within 45 minutes of the police leaving because the law says they have to fax the accident report to OSHA. They were in our building 45 minutes later. The result of that made us, you might say, what's the term? We're the child, the golden child of health and safety in the industry. Yeah, we're the gold standard now. The Met comes up to look at our procedures. The union, as Beverly said, comes up. We still get monitored. And we're monitored because we voluntarily signed on with the Department of Labor of New York, who comes twice a year to review everything we're doing. And we've agreed up front that whatever their recommendations are, we will adhere to. So everything we do is constantly reviewed, constantly monitored by the state of New York, and constantly upgraded to make sure that we are in compliance with whatever their inspectors are saying. That's twice a year. I don't know what other companies do. I mean, one of the things that we're proud of there is when we get visitors, they say, this is the cleanest shop we've ever seen. Well, it has to be because tripping hazards are a real safety violation. So we don't want tripping hazards. We have enough people tripping just over their own feet, so I don't want to put anything out there. So we keep the place clean. There's costs associated with all of this, but I live there. There's a lot of people in this room that live there. We want to live better than that, okay? So we want to go there and, heat. We don't have air conditioning. I got to hear about in a month or two, I'll hear that again. But we wrote it into the contract. We monitor the heat. It's in the 829 contract. If the heat goes to a certain level, we take precautions. We monitor it and we adhere to it. We have to address the needs of the people there because we're not going to get anything done unless they build it, they paint it, they automate it, they sculpt it, whatever they have to do to get it done. We're only there, because here's the other great thing about the business we're in, we're only as good as our last show. Once you foul up a show, there you go. You have to earn your way back in. Yes, Jane?
With all the different shops standards. So how do you compete as a metropolitan area shop paying probably one of the, the highest rent and the highest utilities and all of that? How do you compete?
You want to answer that, Sally? There were 42 new Broadway productions this year. We did 18 of them. No other shop comes close, no matter where they are or anything. So 18 from 42, all the competition split up the rest. We have a reputation based on people like you, people like Roger, Anna, everybody that's here from Hudson, for doing the best work. Some people want the best work. We also have relationships with producers that trust us. They know we're going to stand behind the work. So if there's an issue, we'll get a phone call, we'll correct it. Every show has issues. So the level of degree that you support your product, that you support your producer, you support your general manager, is going to pay dividends over the years, okay? The person that Sally works with, I've been with since 1973. Michael David, producer of Matilda, Jersey Boys, soon to be many other shows that Sally and I don't want to do, but we will do them. And that relationship is based on trust, delivering, and making sure you do it. Then there's the part of Hudson Theatrical Associates, where we go downtown, and you and I had this conversation. And between mid-December and March 15th, HTA loaded in, managed 7 productions. That's a lot of shows, but in a 3-month period. I was never home. Sorry, my wife is right here. She never saw me. Now she's adapting to seeing me again. But that's a lot of shows to load in 7 months. And with that, we don't manage anybody's shows except Hudson shows. HTA strictly exists to get work for Hudson Scenic. So I sold myself, you might say, to go down, load in shows, to make sure that we build them. Historically, there were times when very, very world-famous designer Robin Wagner designed 3 shows a year. We did every one. Then there were producers like Manny Azenberg, would produce many, many shows. We did every one. So we had what we called house accounts, and we were built on that. And then when you do a Lion King, and you build so many Lion Kings you can't remember how many they are, you build on that as well. So there's a way that we've survived, but the core reason we are is hard work, good product, relationships, in whatever order you want to put it, but better be the good work first, because the relationships could go real fast with a bad show. So that's, now, other people have tried different formulas, other people have tried to imitate what we've done, other people have succeeded, because there are other shops, they're not as old as Hudson, but they're not much younger, and they do what they do. Now, none of them do everything. We pride ourselves in that you could get everything from Hudson. Any other questions? I didn't get on a tangent, did I? Nobody told me I was off point yet, by the way, but so maybe I have been. Anything about labor or where it's going? Where it's going right now is training. So Beverly's question is important. This society is critical. We need people that can still use well, they don't use hammers anymore, I'm sorry to say that, but then the philosophy of using a hammer, they need to know that. They need to work with wood. The compressor was out one day. I took a hammer out and I stood in the middle of the shop. I said, remember these? Now start putting nails in with a hammer, because we have electric and pneumatic screw guns and battery operated this and staplers. Everything is automated. The machine shop is totally run by computers. There are still people operating those computers and operating the lathes and the drill presses and all of that. And we have a CNC router, but now it used to be a 1-person job. Now it's 4 people, you know. So technology hasn't eliminated any jobs. What they did is create new opportunities. You use technology to succeed, but you got to train somebody on that. When we bought that router, we didn't have anybody that knew how to use that thing. We bought this thing and I thought, oh my God, we bought this thing and no one knows how to use it. First person that did it was actually a woman that worked for us, was the apprentice, and ended up doing that. And now everybody knows how to use it, except me. I'm not going to try. But yes, I'm not, I mean, and I don't think the unions are not against technology. They were afraid of it. But what they've seen is that it shows tremendous growth. A computerized light board. When we hang a show now, a musical, a big musical, the value of the equipment could exceed $2 million. And with that, on a normal rental, even though there are no normal rentals anymore, that could cost as much as $20,000 a week if it's at one point. That's the math of rental business. You're not going to get that anymore, but it could be true. But you're still going to get $2 million worth of lights. Why? Because a computerized light board could control $2 million worth of lights. When they were using piano boards, and a large show with 6 piano boards, you had 240 practicals. No moving lights, no Vera lights, no Martin lights, but you had 250 lights up there. That's it. To hang $2 million worth of lights takes a week. To hang 250 takes a day. So we've increased the opportunities and the number of jobs because of technology. We haven't subtracted anything. Still want 3 follow spots every time you do a musical. Even with 100 moving lights up there, they still want 3 follow spots. So, and the producers give it to them. So that's what the technology has done. It's provided new opportunities, and like I said, people that have vested in the industry have to provide the training. Yeah, Tom. No, the creative. I'm sorry, the creative staff. That could be a lighting designer, a director, it could be somebody from the creative staff. These mandates come from the creative staff, not from the producer, not from the union, not from any of that. The creative staff is the ones who are telling us what the show must be. And through the budget process, it becomes something. Like if we're over budget on a set, we have to sit and cut the set, make it something they can afford. If we're over budget on the crew size, we have to talk about how we either automate the show to cut the crew down or eliminate some of the show to cut the crew down. But we are working under very rigid budgets when we get to the theater. Anything else? And those budgets are also generated by us. We do those budgets, give them to the general manager. They have to project the load in. We have to project the costs. We have to project what the loadout is, the running crew, all of that. And the odds are, when we do these budgets, we don't even know what the show is. But we're using a collective knowledge of maybe the show, maybe the designer, maybe the creative staff, maybe the number of seats. We know we have to be in a certain range. If we're in a 1,000-seat theater, we have to be in a very small range for crew. So we know those things, or we hope we know them. Anything else? Yes, Al.
I'm just going to say, I can think of one instance alone that management will be contributing to the training and adding to the skill set of a labor pool, and that'll be in Schenectady when Newsies goes up and lays them in text there, because they won't have the skills yet.
They won't have them yet, no.
It will be great for those guys to do it the first time and the second time and the third time, so it becomes a desirable place to tech.
Yeah, it's a tough theater. But there is a labor pool up there. They just don't do a lot of shows. I mean, and this is a big show. This is a big tour.
Running them isn't the same as
No.
installing them and teching them.
No. So this is going to be what we call production. Production is the first stop on any tour. Production is the first stop on any out-of-town Broadway tryout. This is where everything comes together for the first time, and we see what we've got. Production is the hardest part of what we do. And that's the first time: costumes, sets, lights, scenery, automation, the cast. Everybody gets together for the first time. So that will, Schenectady's the town, thanks to the tax law. Buffalo will be next. Is that it? Yep, it is it. Oh, yeah, sorry. Okay, sorry, thanks.
No.
We ended on Buffalo. How did that
Yeah,
happen?
well, I think Schenectady is a very good place to end. I know that we could have sat here all night, But I'm going to suggest we go and have some wine and cheese, and I'm sure Neil will be happy to answer your questions. I just want to thank Neil so much, for Neil really took this topic of labor and illuminated it, and his level of expertise. I mean, I think it is quite correct to say that we have Mr. Broadway here, and literally, what an honor. I mean, you're a fount of knowledge, and we're so pleased that you'd be here this evening. And to mark this occasion, we have a few little things we would like to give you to remember this evening.
First of all, on behalf of the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen, we present this certificate to you for your participation in the Labor, Literature, and Landmarks lecture series, and we loved your lecture, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
We're also making you an honorary member of the library, so please come back and visit.
See,
And
I was just asking, how can I join you?
No, you're a member. It's official. And about the hook you referred to, I just want to clarify, that is a collection of 350 locks, but I'm so curious about the hook.
You never saw a dock worker's hook?
I haven't, so we'll bring one the next time.
Right.
I have tools that we never use anymore.
Well,
Like, I have a tool that we would focus lights with,
okay.
called a century wrench.
All right, I'm
There are no
interested.
century lamps anymore. That's totally useless.
All right, well.
Welcome. So
There's a
come and
home
examine
for
the
them.
collection.
There's a home for them
Yeah, and we
here.
have one
Yes.
little woman, just so Neil will always remember this evening.
Remember the story of the ball? There's the ball
Yeah.
right behind us. Very controversial. Thank you
Thank
very
you
much
so
for
much. What a
inviting me.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Oh, it's
Thank you
been
very
our
much.
honor.
Thank you to
very
all
much.
of you.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. That was absolutely fabulous. It was a history.